The second night from 10 Nights of Dreams, a story for sleep. Close your eyes if you'd like, or simply let your gaze go soft, resting on nothing in particular. Let your body settle wherever you are. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest open and still. There's nothing you need to do right now, nothing to hold on to. For the next little while, you are simply here, listening and resting. Tonight, we are going somewhere different from last time. Not to a quiet room where someone is waiting beside a grave. Not to a story of patient love and 100 years and a white flower in the dawn. Tonight we are going somewhere older, somewhere with more weight to it. A room in a Zen temple in old Japan, where a man is sitting very still in the middle of a night that feels like it will never end, holding a question in his mind that will not answer itself. The second night is not a gentle dream. It is a tighter one. A dream about the difficulty of stillness, about what it feels like to sit and think and push, and find that the pushing is the very thing that prevents you from arriving. But there is something in it that belongs to sleep. The room, the darkness, the lamp burning low, the clock ticking in the next room, the man sitting very still, breathing, trying to let go of the trying. If you have ever lain awake with something moving in your mind that would not stop moving, a thought, a worry, a question, then you will recognize something in this dream. And perhaps, as you listen, the same thing that happened to the samurai will happen to you. Not enlightenment, exactly, but its smaller cousin, the moment when the mind, exhausted by its own effort, finally lets go and everything goes quiet. Breathe in slowly and let it out. Let the day go. Let the week go. Let the mind do what it needs to do, and then let that go too. There is nowhere else to be. I had a dream like this. The monk's chamber was behind him now. The corridor was behind him. The conversation with the head priest, if it could be called a conversation, was behind him. He was back in his own room. The room was small, the kind of room that exists in Zen temples. Not the large ceremonial halls, with their high ceilings, and their gilt altars, and their smell of incense, accumulated over centuries, but the small practical room of a person who is living in the temple for the purpose of practice. A room for sitting. A room for sleeping on a thin mat. A room for being with the question that has been given to you and that you have not yet answered. The andon was burning. The andon is the traditional Japanese lamp. A paper-covered frame inside which a small oil flame burns, producing a light that is soft and diffuse, nothing like the sharp light of modern electric bulbs, more like the light of a candle but steadier, less inclined to flicker, a light that illuminates without asserting itself, that fills the room with a quality of visibility that is closer to dusk than to day. He had adjusted the wick when he entered, a small piece of plant fiber floating in oil, drawn the oil up by capillary action and burning at its tip, and a clove-like flower had fallen from the ornamental holder onto the red lacquered stand with a soft sound, and the room had brightened slightly. On the sliding door there was a painting. The painter was Busen, Yosa Busen, the 18th century poet and artist who was one of the great masters of haiku, and also a painter of considerable skill, a person who moved between words and images with the ease of someone for whom the boundary between them was not a boundary at all, but simply a choice of tools. The painting showed a willow tree, its branches painted in black ink, some strokes dense and dark, others thin and pale, the gradations of pressure and ink load producing a range of tones that suggested depth and distance without depicting them directly. A fisherman was walking along the bank. He was small, small enough to indicate that he was at a distance, small enough that the details of his face were not visible, that he was more a presence than a person, and he wore a straw hat tilted at an angle that suggested cold weather or wind, or the habit of a man who has walked this bank many times before and has settled into the particular posture of the familiar journey. In the Tokonoma alcove, a scroll hung showing Monju Bosatsu, Manjushri in Sanskrit, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, who is depicted in Buddhist iconography as a young figure seated on a lion, holding in one hand a sword with which to cut through ignorance, and in the other a lotus flower on which rests a text, the Sutra of Wisdom. Monju Bosatsu is associated with prajna, the Sanskrit word for wisdom, the kind of wisdom that is not accumulated through study, but realized through direct experience, the wisdom that is not knowing more but seeing more clearly, the wisdom that Zen practice is designed, over long years of sitting and asking and failing and sitting again, to produce. And somewhere in the next room, the large room, the room for ceremonies, a clock was ticking. A Western-style clock. This is significant. In the Japan of this story's time, the Meiji era, the era of rapid modernization, the era in which Japan was absorbing Western technology and Western ideas with a speed and thoroughness that was causing its own kind of disturbance in the people who lived through it. A Western-style clock in a Zen temple was not an unremarkable object. It was a collision, a small one, a clock-shaped collision between two ways of understanding time. The Zen understanding of time has no minutes. It has no seconds. It has, to the extent that it has anything, the present moment, which is not a unit of measurement but a quality of experience, a way of being in time that makes the question of how much time has passed irrelevant. The Western clock counts. It divides. It measures the distance from now to then and insists that the distance matters. The clock in the next room was counting. He could hear it. He was a samurai. This needs a moment of explanation, not because the word is unfamiliar, but because what it meant to be a samurai in this particular era was complicated in a way that the word itself does not immediately convey. The samurai class had existed in Japan for centuries before this dream. Warriors by training and by heredity, they had occupied a position at the top of the social order, above the farmers, the artisans, the merchants, and their identity had been inseparable from their function: to serve their lord, to fight when fighting was required, to die well when dying was required. The code by which they lived, the code loosely called Bushido, the way of the warrior, placed particular emphasis on certain qualities: loyalty, courage, and a specific relationship to death that involved neither fearing it nor seeking it, but accepting it as the natural conclusion of a life lived with honor. A samurai who had been shamed, who had lost a battle, failed a lord, or been publicly humiliated, had recourse to a particular act that restored, in the understanding of the code, the honor that had been lost. He knew this. It was not an abstract thing he knew. It was a thing he knew in his body, in the particular way that people who are raised inside a code know the code, not as a rule to be considered, but as a reality to be lived. But the world had changed. In the years leading up to this dream, Japan had undergone a transformation more rapid and more complete than almost any country had undergone in recorded history. The old order had been dismantled. The shogunate that had governed Japan for centuries had been replaced. The feudal hierarchy, the lords, the samurai, the classes below, had been legally abolished. Samurai were no longer samurai in any official sense. They could no longer carry their swords in public. The purpose that had organized their identity for generations, service, loyalty, the warrior's function, had been removed, and nothing entirely satisfactory had been put in its place. And into this displacement, this identity without a clear object, some samurai came to Zen temples. They came seeking something that the changed world had not destroyed and could not destroy, a way of understanding themselves that did not depend on external function, that came from inside rather than outside, that was theirs regardless of what the world decided samurai were allowed to be. This samurai was one of those. He had come to the temple seeking enlightenment, and the head priest had given him a koan. A koan is a question without an answer, or rather, a question whose answer cannot be arrived at through the ordinary processes of thinking. Not a riddle exactly. A riddle has an answer, and once you find it, the riddle is finished. A koan is different. A koan is designed to bring the thinking mind to the edge of what thinking can do and push it over. The most famous koan in Zen is this. A monk asked the master Jiaozhou, Joshu in Japanese, whether a dog has Buddha nature. Jiaozhou said, mu. Mu is a word that means, roughly, nothing, or no, or an absence that is not simply the absence of something present, but a more fundamental kind of not having, an absence that precedes the question of presence. The koan is not asking you to decide whether a dog has Buddha nature. It is not a theological question. It is asking you to hold the word mu until the word mu stops being a word and starts being something else, something that cannot be named because naming is exactly what it is, asking you to move beyond. The head priest had given him this koan, or a version of it, or perhaps a different koan that amounted to the same thing. The exact words do not matter as much as the instruction. Sit with this. Hold it. Do not think your way to the answer, because there is no thinking your way to the answer. Simply sit. Simply hold. Simply be present with the question until something shifts. He had been sitting with it for some time. He had gone to the priest's chamber, the formal interview that Zen practice requires, in which the student presents his understanding of the koan to the teacher, and the teacher had not been satisfied. The teacher had, in fact, been considerably more than not satisfied. The teacher had said, "You are a samurai. If you are a samurai, there is no reason you cannot realize enlightenment." The teacher had said, "The fact that you have not realized it suggests that perhaps you are not a samurai at all." The teacher had said, "You are the dregs of humanity." These words were a teaching too. In Zen, the teacher's harshness is often the most important part of the teaching. The provocation designed to break through the student's defenses, to find the crack in the wall of self that ordinary politeness cannot find, to reach the place where the student is actually stuck, rather than the place where the student is presenting themselves as stuck. A teacher who says you are doing beautifully is not necessarily helping you. A teacher who says you are the dregs of humanity is delivering a shock that might, if the student has the right relationship to it, shake loose something that was lodged. He knew this. He understood the pedagogy, but understanding the pedagogy did not make the words less cutting, and beneath the cut, beneath the pride that had been struck and was burning, was the fear. 5. The Return. He knelt on the sitting cushion and reached under it with his right hand. The dagger was there. He had known it would be there. He had placed it there himself, and he had checked for it before, and yet the confirmation of its presence was still a particular kind of knowledge, different from the abstract knowledge that it was there. The hilt was wrapped in silk cord. The scabbard was lacquered red, the color of lacquer that has been built up in many thin layers over many months, each layer dried and polished before the next was applied, the color deepening with each layer until it reached the particular depth of old lacquer red, which is not the bright red of fresh paint, but a darker, warmer red, the red of something that has been worked at and completed. He held the scabbard. He did not draw the blade. Not yet. He had made a decision in the corridor, coming back from the priest's chamber. If he could not attain enlightenment before the clock in the next room struck the next hour, he would use the dagger, a samurai who had been publicly shamed and could not restore his honor, had only one option. He understood this. His body understood it, and the understanding gave the night a particular quality, not quite fear, not quite calm, but something between them, the quality of a moment when everything that is usually vague becomes very clear, when the world simplifies itself to the essential things and the non-essential things fall away. He set the dagger down beside him on the tatami. He straightened his back. He adjusted his position on the cushion, the particular sitting position of Zen meditation, which requires the back to be straight and the knees to be in contact with the floor, and the hands to be held in a specific way in the lap. And he began. He said to himself, "Mu." He said it again, "Mu." He said it not as a sound he was making, but as a thing he was becoming, as if mu were not a syllable, but a direction, a place to go, a quality of being that he was trying to inhabit the way you inhabit a room by going into it and staying there. The incense had been lit earlier in the evening. He had lit it himself. A stick of incense placed in the small holder on the low table near the corner of the room, the tip touched with a flame and then blown out, the ember left to burn on its own at the pace of incense, which is the slowest pace of any burning thing. Incense in Japan has a very long history. It was brought from the continent, from China, and before that, from India, and before that, from the places further west, where the plants and resins used in incense were originally found, brought in the same currents of cultural exchange that brought Buddhism, that brought the writing system, that brought the aesthetic sensibilities that shaped what Japanese culture became. The word for incense appreciation in Japanese, kodo, the way of incense, uses the same construction as kendo and judo and chado, the tea ceremony, the suffix that means way, path, the kind of practice that is not just a skill, but a mode of being, a way of organizing the attention around a particular activity until the activity and the attention become inseparable. The incense he had lit was a dark, resinous kind. Not the light floral incenses of certain ceremonial contexts, but something older and heavier, with a smell that was closer to the smell of the earth than the smell of flowers. It had filled the room while it burned, and he had breathed it in, and it had done something to the quality of the room, not changed it exactly, but added something to it, a density, a sense of the room being more fully itself. Now the stick had burned to nothing. The smell that remained was the ghost of it, thinner, cooler, the edges of the scent without the center. He breathed it in anyway. It was still something. The lamp burned. The room was quiet. Outside the paper screens, the night was doing what nights do, being dark, being still, being the particular absence of the day that allows other things to become present, the sounds that the day's noise covers, the quality of the air when it is not being moved through, the way a room feels when the only person in it is sitting very still, and the room itself has a chance to be simply what it is. He sat. The word moo moved in his mind, or rather, he tried to make the word moo move in his mind, and something moved, but it was not quite what he was reaching for. This is the difficulty of Zen practice that no description can fully convey, and that he was living inside at this moment. The fact that what you are trying to do cannot be done by trying. The mind that is trying to let go is still holding. The mind that is trying to become empty is still full of the effort to become empty, which is itself a kind of fullness. He knew this. He had been told this. He had read about this in texts and heard about it from teachers and understood it with the part of him that understands things by thinking about them. But understanding it with that part was exactly the wrong kind of understanding. The clock ticked in the next room. Each tick was a small subtraction from the time he had remaining. He tried not to count the ticks. He tried to let the ticking be simply a sound. One of the sounds of the room, no more significant than the sound of the lamp, or the faint sound of the night air pressing against the paper screens. A sound that was there and did not need to be attended to. But the ticking would not be made into simply a sound. It remained what it was, a countdown, a measurement, a Western clock in a Zen temple doing the one thing it knew how to do, which was to divide time into units and insist that each unit mattered. Moo, he said in his mind. Moo. The word was there, and then it was not there. He chased it. The chasing was wrong. He knew the chasing was wrong, but knowing the chasing was wrong did not stop the chasing. It simply added to the chase the additional weight of knowing it was wrong, which made everything heavier. He breathed. He tried to simply breathe. In through the nose, slowly, the air moving into the lungs, in the way that air moves when the body is still, without hurry, without effort, the diaphragm dropping, the ribs expanding, the lungs filling from the bottom, and out, slowly, completely, the air released without holding anything back. Zen meditation, zazen, the sitting practice, has a very specific form. It is not simply sitting. It is not simply closing the eyes and resting. It is a particular way of being in the body, while being in the mind, while being with the question that does not have an answer. The posture matters. In Zen, the posture is not secondary to the practice. It is part of the practice, inseparable from it. because the position of the body affects the quality of the mind in ways that centuries of practitioners have observed and recorded and passed down to the people who came after them. The back must be straight, not rigid, not military straight, but naturally erect, the spine finding its own length without being forced into it, the head balanced on top of the spine without being held there by muscular effort. The hands are held in the lap, the right hand resting in the left, the tips of the thumbs touching lightly, forming a small oval that is called the cosmic mudra, the gesture of enlightenment, the shape that the hands take when the body is in the state that the mind is trying to arrive at. The eyes are open. This surprises people who imagine meditation as something you do with closed eyes, as an inward journey, a turning away from the world. But in Zen, the eyes are half open, the gaze directed at the floor a few feet in front of the sitting person, soft and unfocused, taking in light but not pursuing it, present to the visible world without being caught by any particular thing in it. The world is not shut out. It is simply received without grasping. The breathing is nasal, in through the nose, out through the nose. Long exhalations, the belly moving rather than the chest, the breath originating in the lower body and releasing from there. Not the shallow chest breathing of anxiety or effort, but the deep, slow breathing of someone who has settled into their body, the way water settles into a container, filling the available space, finding its own level. He was doing all of this. His back was straight. His hands were in the cosmic mudra. His eyes were open and soft. His breath was moving in the lower body. The form was correct. The form had always been correct. The form was not the problem. The lamp cast its soft light across the room. The painting on the sliding door, the willow, the fisherman, the cold bank, was visible at the edge of his field of vision, but he was not looking at it. He was looking at nothing, or trying to look at nothing, which is different from looking at nothing, in the same way that trying to sleep is different from sleeping, the effort itself being the obstacle, the desire being the thing that stands between you and the thing you desire. He thought about the priest's words. He did not want to think about the priest's words. He knew that thinking about the priest's words was exactly the wrong thing to be doing. But the words were there, in the room with him, as present as the lamp and the painting. You are the dregs of humanity, and they would not be made to leave by his wanting them to leave. He had been insulted by someone he had come to for help. He had been called something that, in his understanding of himself, he was not, or rather, he had been called something that he could not afford to be, that his identity could not contain, that his code of honor could not absorb without requiring a response. A samurai who'd been called the dregs of humanity had two options. The first was enlightenment, which would allow him to return to the priest's chamber and demonstrate, through whatever means Zen used for demonstration, that he had arrived at the understanding the priest had told him he lacked, and having demonstrated it, to do what he had promised himself he would do, which we will leave in the shadow of the dream, unspoken, as Soseki himself left it in the original. The second was the dagger. Both of these options required him to stop doing what he was doing, which was sitting in the middle of the night, thinking about both options and being unable to do either. He breathed. He said, "Moo." the word was just a word again. He tried to go deeper into it, to find the place in the word that was not a word, the place past language where language is trying to point. Every tradition that concerns itself with the nature of the mind eventually arrives at this instruction. Stop thinking. Not temporarily, not while you consider what to think next, but actually stop. Let the movement in the mind become still, the way the surface of water becomes still when nothing is disturbing it, when the wind has stopped and the rain has stopped and there is nothing adding itself to the water anymore. He had been trying to do this for weeks. He had not yet done it. The clock ticked, the lamp burned. The incense that had been lit earlier in the evening, he could smell it still, faintly from the darker end of the room, had burned down to nothing, and the smell of it was all that remained. The ghost of a smell, the scent of something that had been present and had used itself up, and was now only the memory of itself. He sat in the ghost of the incense smell, and breathed and said moo, and found moo, and lost moo, and found it again, and was not certain whether what he was finding was moo, or simply the word moo, which was not the same thing. Zen came to Japan from China. It arrived in the 12th and 13th centuries, carried by Japanese monks who had traveled to China in the particular way that important ideas travel, not gradually, not diffusing slowly across a border, but carried by specific people who went somewhere, found something, and brought it back. The word Zen is the Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese word Chan, which is itself the Chinese pronunciation of the Sanskrit word dhyana, the Sanskrit word for meditation, for the practice of sustained attention, for the quality of mind that Zen is designed to cultivate. Something was added to the concept at each stage of transmission, each language adding its own shadings, each culture giving the practice its own particular form, so that Zen, as it was practiced in Japan, was not identical to Chan as it was practiced in China, and neither was identical to what the Sanskrit word was pointing at in the Indian context where it originated, but something persisted through all the translations, something that was recognizable across all the forms, something that had to do with sitting still and attending carefully and finding out, through the attending, something about the nature of the mind that the attending itself reveals. In Japan, Zen became associated with warriors. This association seems paradoxical. What does a practice of stillness and non-attachment have to do with people who are trained to fight? But the connection was real and ran deep. The samurai found in Zen a practice that addressed their particular problem, which was the problem of death. A warrior who is afraid of dying is a warrior whose fear will compromise their effectiveness at the decisive moment. A warrior who has genuinely confronted death, who has sat with the fact of their own mortality long enough to stop running from it, who's arrived at something that might be called acceptance, or might be called the cessation of the fear of cessation, is a different kind of warrior, not necessarily a better fighter in the technical sense, but a freer one, a fighter who, in the moment of the fight, is not distracted by what the fight might mean for their continued existence. This samurai had come to Zen for exactly this reason, not because he expected to fight. The world in which samurai fought had largely ended, but because the problem that Zen addressed, The problem of how to be present in the face of death, how to act from a place that is not moved by the fear of it, was still his problem, even in a world that had taken away the context in which the problem had traditionally arisen. He was still a samurai. The world had changed. The function had been removed, but the identity remained, with all of its demands and all of its complications, and Zen was one of the things that the identity pointed toward when it needed to find its bearings. Let us stay for a moment in this room, not with the samurai's struggle, not with the Koan and the dagger and the clock, but simply with the room itself, which is doing something quietly that does not require the samurai's attention, and does not require ours either, but is worth noticing. The room is doing what rooms do at night. It is being still. The paper screens that separate it from the outside are doing their particular work, neither transparent nor opaque, neither admitting the outside nor completely excluding it, but creating a membrane between the two, a place where inside and outside become uncertain, where the light from inside mingles at the paper surface with whatever darkness is outside, and the result is a quality of boundary that is softer than a wall and more definite than open air. The tatami is doing its own quiet thing. Old tatami in a Zen temple has been sat on by many people for many years, and it carries this in its surface, in the slight compression of the woven rush, in the particular way the light moves across it, in the smell that comes up from it when the temperature changes, warm and dry and faintly sweet, the smell of something that has been present through many seasons, and many people, and many moments like this one, moments of difficulty, moments of stillness, moments when someone sat in this room in the middle of the night with a question they could not answer and breathed and waited. The andon lamp is making a small sound, not a loud sound, almost inaudible, but if you are sitting in a very quiet room in the middle of a very quiet night, the small sounds become audible, that the louder parts of the day conceal. The flame inside the paper frame is moving slightly, not flickering visibly, but moving in the small, constant way of a flame that is drawing fuel from below and releasing heat and light from above, a continuous process, a balance of intake and release that looks like stillness, but is actually a very rapid series of small transactions between the flame and the air around it. The sound it makes is almost a sound of breathing. And the clock in the next room, its ticking fills the silence the way a single sound fills silence, not by defeating it, but by revealing it, the way a single note, played in a quiet room, does not destroy the quiet, but shows you how quiet the quiet was, by providing something for the quiet to surround. Tick, and then the silence. Tick, and then the silence again. Each tick the same, each silence the same length, each cycle identical to the one before it, and the one before that, and the one that will follow it for as long as the spring inside the clock has tension in it. The clock does not care about enlightenment. The clock does not care about samurai. The clock is simply doing what clocks do, which is divide the night into equal pieces and mark each division with a sound. Let us consider for a moment what Mu is trying to point at, not to explain it. Explanations of Mu are themselves a kind of missing the point, because Mu is specifically designed to take you to a place that explanation cannot reach, but to circle around it the way you circle around something you cannot look at directly, noticing its edges and its shadows without claiming to see the thing itself. The monk Jiaozhu was asked, "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" This is a theological question on the surface. Buddhist teaching holds that all sentient beings have Buddha nature, the inherent capacity for enlightenment, the seed of awakening that exists in every conscious thing. So the answer should be yes. Of course, a dog has Buddha nature. But Zhaozhou said mu, not yes, not no, mu, which is what? One way to approach it. The question itself is the problem. The question asks whether a dog has or does not have something. It operates within a framework of having and not having, of presence and absence, of things that are true and things that are false. Mu refuses the framework. Mu says, "Your question contains an assumption that I am not going to honor." Your question assumes that there is a right answer within the category of answers you are offering. Mu steps outside the category. Another way to approach it, the way that is perhaps more useful for sitting. Mu is not something you understand. Mu is something you become. You do not solve mu by thinking harder about dogs and Buddha nature. You sit with mu until mu stops being a word and starts being the quality of awareness itself, the quality of awareness that is present before the mind divides the world into things and evaluates those things and builds from the evaluations the particular construction that we call the self-experiencing the world. Before that construction, before the division, before the having and the not having, and the yes and the no, and the I and the not I. That is where mu lives. That is where the sitting is trying to go. And the difficulty, the profound, maddening, centuries-old difficulty, is that the sitting is being done by the very mind that is trying to get past itself. The one who is trying to see is the thing in the way of the seeing. He knew this. He had known this for weeks. He sat in the knowledge of it and breathed and said mu, and was no closer and was perhaps no further, and did not know and kept sitting. He sat. The night moved around him the way the night moves around a person who is sitting still inside it, not noticed, not unfelt, but not attended to, simply present, the background against which everything else is happening. The mind has a quality, in long sitting, of becoming less insistent, not immediately, not in the first hour, not even in the second hour. The first hours of sitting are often the noisiest, the mind producing its loudest contents, its most urgent concerns, as if offended by the stillness and determined to fill it. But later, much later, in the hours after the urgency has exhausted itself, the mind begins to produce things of a different quality, not quieter exactly, but less attached to itself, less certain that its contents are important, less insistent that they be attended to. He had been here before, not in this room, not on this night, but in this place in the sitting, this place past the first exhaustion of the mind, and before whatever comes next. He knew it was not enlightenment. He knew it was not mu. He knew it was a place of relative quiet that could be mistaken for arrival, but was not arrival. It was simply the mind, between one set of thoughts and the next, resting in its own relative silence, the way a person rests between the exhalation and the next inhalation. But he also knew that this was closer to the thing he was looking for, or closer to the place where the looking might stop and the finding might begin, if finding was even the right word. if there was anything to find, if Mu was a place to arrive at, or simply a quality of being that was always already present and was only hidden by the noise of the mind looking for it. He breathed. The lamp burned. The clock ticked. The painting on the door was there. The willow, the cold fisherman, at the edge of his vision. He was not thinking about the priest. He was not thinking about the dagger. He was not thinking about honor or shame or what would happen when the clock struck. He was simply breathing, and in the breathing, something had become less, not gone, not dissolved, but less present, less insistent, less certain of its right to be the center of everything. The night was deepening, not getting darker. It was already as dark as it was going to get. The darkness outside the paper screens, the darkness of the hours past midnight, when the world has fully committed to its nightward turn and will not begin to lighten for some time yet. But deepening in the sense that night deepens when you have been inside it long enough, when the novelty of the darkness has worn away, and what remains is simply the fact of it, the steady, unremarkable fact of the world being dark and still and doing what it does in the hours when most people are asleep. In the rooms of the temple around him, other practitioners were sleeping, or sitting, or lying awake with their own questions, their own versions of the problem that had no solution by the methods that problems usually have solutions. He was not alone in this building. He was alone in this room, this particular room, with its lamp and its painting and its dagger. But the building held other people, and the building itself was held by the grounds of the temple, and the grounds were held by the night. Outside, the temple grounds would be quiet. In Japan, temple grounds are designed with a particular understanding of quiet, not the absence of sound, but a managed relationship to sound, an arrangement of space and material and vegetation that absorbs and softens the sounds of the world beyond the walls. The gravel of the approach path, the old trees whose presence changes the quality of the air, the stone basins of water at the entry, whose function is both practical and something beyond practical, the act of washing before entering sacred space being both a literal cleaning and a symbolic one, a way of marking the transition from the ordinary world to this one. The gate, the old wooden gate with its heavy roof of gray tile and its worn stone threshold, all of it quiet, all of it doing its particular kind of work, the work of being a place where stillness is possible, where the density of the world is reduced just enough for the mind to have a chance to hear itself. He breathed. The room received his breathing. The lamp burned. The clock ticked. The painting was still. And somewhere in the building, not far, not close, simply somewhere in the wooden structure of the place, a sound, not a significant sound, the settling of old wood in the night air, the kind of sound that old buildings make in the hours when no one is moving through them, a small adjustment, a small complaint, a small expression of the material's response to the temperature of the night, and then quiet again. Quiet that was, if anything, quieter for the sound that had punctuated it, the way silence after a small sound is always more complete than the silence before it. And then something happened, or something stopped happening. It is difficult to say which. Difficult because what happened was not the kind of event that has a clear beginning and a clear ending, not the kind of thing you can point to afterward and say, there, that is when it changed. The Anden lamp was there and not there. The painting of the willow and the cold fisherman was visible and not visible. The tatami was present and not present. The staggered shelves in the corner of the room, there and not there. This is not the same as disappearing. Things that disappear are gone. These things were not gone. They were present in the way that things are present when the mind is not insisting on their presence. When the mind has stopped performing its usual function of going out to meet the world and returning with reports. Present in the way that everything is always present when the mind is not selecting what to notice and what to ignore. Not building the world it usually builds out of the material the world provides. And Mu, the word he had been holding, the question he had been sitting with, the thing he had been trying and failing to move past the level of language. Mu was there and not there, not resolved, not answered, but differently present. No longer a word he was saying, no longer a direction he was moving in, simply there, the way the lamp was there, the way the tatami was there. One more fact of the room, unremarkable, requiring nothing. He could not have said whether he was enlightened. He could not have said whether this was what enlightenment felt like, or whether it was simply exhaustion, simply the mind, finally running out of the fuel it needed to maintain its usual effort. He did not know. He was not certain he was the right person to ask. He sat in the not knowing, and it was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable. It was simply the quality of the room at this moment, the quality of the night, the quality of a mind that had been working very hard and had arrived somewhere that it did not have a name for. The clock struck, not the gentle, gradual preparation of a clock about to strike, not the small preliminary clicks and tensions that a person sitting very still in a very quiet room might hear before the striking mechanism engages, but the strike itself, the first note of the chime, which arrived in the room with the suddenness of all sounds that arrive in silence. He startled. The state he had been in, whatever it was, broke. The lamp was the lamp again. The painting was the painting. The tatami was the tatami. The room was a room in a Zen temple in the middle of the night, and he was a samurai sitting in it, with a red lacquered dagger beside him, and an unresolved koan in his mind, and a priest who had called him the dregs of humanity, somewhere in the building. All of this came back with the returning of the clock's chime, or rather, it had never gone away. It was simply that for a moment, he had not been in relationship with it in the usual way. He looked at the dagger. His hand moved toward it, not with intention exactly, not with the decisive movement of a person who has made a decision and is carrying it out, but with the movement of a body that has a habit, and the habit is reaching for the dagger when the situation reaches a certain point. His hand found the hilt. He gripped it. The silk cord was smooth under his fingers. The weight of the weapon was known and familiar. The weight of something he had carried for many years, something that had been part of his body's world for long enough that holding it felt not like picking something up, but like making a connection that was already there. He drew the blade. The lacquered scabbard went to the side. The blade was cold cold in the way of metal that has been sitting in a room at night, taking on the temperature of the air around it, which is always cooler than the temperature of the body that handles it. The blade caught the lamp's light and returned it in a long, cold gleam, a gleam that moved from the base of the blade to the tip as he turned it, following the light, making of the metal surface a small mirror for the small flame of the andon in the corner. And then the dream ended, not with a resolution, not with the samurai putting the blade down and returning to his meditation, not with enlightenment arriving in a flood of clarity, not with any of the endings that a person composing a story rather than remembering a dream might provide, but simply ended the way dreams end, without permission, without conclusion, in the middle of whatever was happening. Let it all soften now. The small room in the Zen temple, the andon burning low, the painting of the cold fisherman walking along the bank in the dim light, the tatami and the smell of old incense and the staggered shelves in the corner, the samurai sitting very still, the word mu in the silence, the dagger beside him on the floor, the clock in the next room counting. Let it dissolve gently, the way the quality of the room dissolved for him in the deepest part of the sitting, the way the lamp became there and not there, the way the hard edges of things softened into something less insistent, not disappearing, but resting, held lightly, present without demanding. There is something in this dream for sleep, not the urgency, not the dagger and the deadline and the priest's hard words, but the room, the lamp, the sitting, the experience of being inside a very quiet space in the middle of the night with nothing required of you except to breathe and be present and let the mind do what the mind does without insisting that it do anything differently. The samurai was trying to force his way to stillness. That is not what we are doing tonight. We are simply here, in the room, breathing, letting whatever is moving in the mind move at its own pace without chasing it and without stopping it. The clock will tick. Thoughts will come. Let them tick. Let them come. They are part of the room too. There is nothing left to hold tonight. You are warm, and you are still, and you are exactly where you should be. Let your breathing slow. Let the quiet take you, not by force, not by trying, simply by being here, in this room, in this night, letting the night do what the night does when you stop asking it to be anything other than what it is. Rest well. Sleep well. Good night.